James 4, 1 through 3. What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and you do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and you do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. We ended last time by saying that the passions mentioned, that the passions that verse 1 say are at war within you, could be taken to mean, and are often taken to mean, either these are passions are at war within one individual or at war within a corporate body between individuals. And I said that it is fine. I think it's fine to take it both ways. There are certainly passions at war within one individual and between individuals as well. When we come to verse 2, however, it is clear that James, at least now, is focusing on fightings between individuals, external, not internal wars. And he's saying that our passions run amok lead to frightening consequences in the corporate body. You desire, he says, and you do not have. Desire here, the word desire, is generally taken to be synonymous with the word he uses for passion in verse 1. We said that word in verse 1 is hedone, but that word does not really have a commonly used verbal form in Greek. So the word he uses for desire here is generally taken to be the verbal form that would be used if you're talking about hedone or you're trying to make that into a verb. So he's linking this desire with the passions he mentions in verse 1. It is a strong desire for something that you currently do not have, some pleasure that you have this passionate desire for. And not obtaining this, James says, leads to murder. Now, commentators have struggled with what exactly he means. Are the people in the church killing each other here? Because it doesn't seem that James is talking about hypotheticals in this. He's addressing problems in the church. And so it seems a bit shocking. Some have suggested that some of the Jewish converts that James is writing to were part of the zealot movement of the day, which sought to assassinate Romans in an attempt to clear them from the land. So he was basically saying that sort of behavior is not acceptable now that you're in the Christian church. However, James seems to be talking about fighting within the church, not fighting outside of it. So it doesn't seem like he would actually be addressing zealots here in this passage. It seems more likely that James is pointing out the real danger that comes if our passions, like the tongues of chapter 3, are left unchecked. And he is saying violence is very much at play if we leave our passions to run on their own without keeping them under control. People, and this is empirically verified fact. We see people get violent when they cannot control their passions, their strong desires, when they do not get what they want. Now, if you're someone like me, you actually feel pretty good about yourself at this point, because I never have violent urges. I never get to the point where I want to hurt physically or murder someone. Never had that urge in my life. And so I'm likely to sit back and say, well, great, I have my passions in check. I'm doing good. James is not talking to me. But it is good to remember that James clearly throughout his teaching follows the teaching of Jesus, both in style and in content. And it is Jesus himself that taught that hating someone in your heart equals murder. And for those of us who never get beyond internal murder, I think James might well be speaking to us as well. Do I have contempt for someone? Do I have resentment towards someone in my heart? Though I never have violent urges, I certainly have that sentiment in my heart sometimes. And that comes from often a problem in my own desires, not getting the respect or the attention or something from that person that I think I deserve. And so I now may not be physically violent. I'm not above sometimes using the tongue that James talks about in chapter 3 as being so destructive, to vent my frustrated desires. In a similar vein, James continues, you covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. Well, I think there are indeed just wars at times in the fight against evil. I also think that the vast majority of our conflicts that we see, that we engage in, are not just wars at bottom. They involve two people or a group of people who are simply not getting what they want. And so they fight. Not getting the respect they think they deserve, not getting enough attention, not getting the position or power they crave. And whatever we use to justify our going to war with someone, we'll do it. We are, as I have said many times, we are masters at justifying our behavior. But at bottom, we're not getting what we want. And so we get angry and we fight. And this comes from following the earthly wisdom, which is marked by jealousy and selfish ambitions, and leads to great frustration when our desires are not met. James goes on to make a rather surprising claim, or at least it is for me, about the Christian and our desires. He ties our frustrated desires to prayer. He says first that you do not have because you do not ask, which is a strange thing to say. But I think my guess is what he's saying is we seek our desires, what we want, without the purifying process of honest prayer. We go after things, and maybe in our heart of hearts, we know that it is simply we're pursuing this for the gratification of our own flesh, getting what I want. So we absent prayer from our lives, at least in this aspect of our lives. We do not have the purifying process of honest prayer. Or, he goes on, if we do pray and ask, we do so wrongly, simply seeking gratification of our desires. We are mercenary in our asking. We come to God as some sort of great, wonderful grandfather who's just going to satisfy all our desires for pleasure, and not seeking him himself. Of course, we are here to call to mind chapter 1, verses 5 and 8, when James tells us to ask for wisdom. And we've talked about this verse a lot. I think it's a very important passage. And he says, ask for wisdom, but do so in faith, not doubting. And once again, as I've said many times, that doubting is not an intellectual doubt. Rather, it is the lack of commitment and devotion to God, being the double-minded, wanting him and something else, right? Wanting that pleasure and seeing God then as a means to getting the pleasure, the thing that I want. The true asking strives for wisdom, and through that wholeness and completion. Jesus himself does tell us to ask, and it will be given to us. But he expects the asking to be done in an attitude of seeking first the kingdom of heaven. Now, this seems to me to be an unreasonable burden in some sense. None of us can totally purify our hearts and motives before approaching God in supplication. Well, I say none of us. I never have found the ability to go and approach God with a perfectly pure heart and perfectly pure motives. But we can come with the desire that he will cleanse us where we are impure in our motives. I was confronted with this in my own life with an example of this just yesterday. So I prepared this lesson 2 days ago, and then at night, and then the following morning, I was beginning preparation for preaching on Sunday. And I began the preparation by praying for God to help me, give me the guidance as I prepared for Sunday, and help me to preach and preach well, and all this sort of stuff. And I had this James lesson on my mind at the same time. And I realized as I was asking for God, asking for my desire there, I realized some of what I meant when I asked him to help me prepare well for Sunday. And some of it, there was a great desire to uh, not just have the words that would be spoken to God's people that were needed and were encouraging and strengthening. Some of it was, God, help me be clever. Help me come up with words that will be lauded. And I would not have said this, but this is what I wanted. Help me to be able to come with a new approach to this that will be considered having deep insight, and so that I will be recognized as someone who's a deep thinker and a good thinker. And that's what I wanted from God in asking him to help me prepare well for Sunday. Now, it didn't do much good for me just to say, oh, well, I recognize some of my impure motives there. And in other words, it doesn't work to say, oh, out, bad motive, out, be gone, you're evil. I still have it. I was still there once I had recognized it. So the only thing I knew to do was to that point say, go to God and say, God, I recognize that I am not asking you purely altruistically for the sake of the people of St. Andrews and who will hear me. I recognize I have this impure motive. Still, please help me for their sake, for my sake, to prepare well and purify me as I'm doing it. So it is a going to God with an honesty about where you're at and what your motives are, and asking him for help, both in the thing you're asking for and in the purifying of the requests. I think it's good to have an honesty in prayer before God, and that, I think, is the for us sinful humans, is the way that we can go asking for him rightly, and it allows us to be able to say at that time, look, I recognize I'm impure. If indeed this is not good for me, then so be it. I will abide by your will. So, yeah, well, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.